Daniel had severe prosopagnosia, so I successfully married him in place of my sister. 3 years later, as soon as my sister Yara returned to the country, she begged me to return Daniel to her. I discreetly disappeared with our child. When we met again, I nervously had my son call him Uncle. Daniel's face turned cold, his voice indifferent. "Miss Emma, do you call your father Uncle?" Later he pressed against me, kissing fiercely. "Emma, I have prosopagnosia, but I'm not blind. Besides, the obvious A and D."
Welcome to listen to my full sweet love series novel. I'm the blogger and I'm Twilight's novel. Now let's start the main story.
2 months ago, the Daniel family came with a childhood photo of my sister Yara to propose. My father, Mr. Sue, agreed to the marriage to solve the company's financial crisis. The wedding date was set that same day. Unexpectedly, the night before the scheduled wedding photos, my stepmother Mrs. Chan and Yara knelt before me. Yara said, "Emma, please. I love Ethan, I can't marry Daniel." Yara had secretly promised herself to Ethan, the heir of Hong Kong. But the Ethan family looked down on our family and opposed their relationship. Mrs. Chin said, "Emma, Daniel has severe prosopagnosia. He's only seen Yara once, he won't be able to tell the difference. You and Yara are so close, please help her." I helped them up, feeling conflicted. After 13 seconds of intense internal struggle, I agreed. The reason was simple. I was attracted to his good looks. Mrs. Chen told me she had anticipated Yara's refusal and wrote my name on the marriage certificate. Yara and Ethan left the country overnight. I took the family crest Daniel had given me to the wedding dress shop, thinking, if discovered, I'd show the crest and accuse him of deceiving my young heart. Daniel's gaze swept over me. His brow slightly furrowed. His eyes were cold, as if piercing through everything, straight to the heart. His dark eyes held no warmth, filled with scrutiny and inquiry. I nervously smiled, fingers unconsciously twisting my clothes. Just as I tried to avoid his gaze, he suddenly smiled faintly. The smile was shallow but softened his eyes instantly. I froze, my heart skipping a beat, my fake smile stiffening. "Emma, you're still the same as when you were little," Daniel said as he walked straight towards me. I breathed a sigh of relief. His prosopagnosia was indeed severe. Everything proceeded smoothly. The day after the engagement was set, Daniel's company faced a crisis due to major strategic errors. Days before the wedding, the company's situation seemed worse. Reports said they needed to solve funding issues first. After much hesitation, I asked my uncle for money. Money to fill Daniel's company's hole? My uncle saw through me immediately. "Uncle," I cooed. "How did I teach you since childhood? Pitying men brings 3 years of bad luck. Spending money on men brings a lifetime of misfortune. Your mother is a prime example. Thankfully she woke up early. My parents divorced when I was young due to marital discord. She left me some money under my uncle's care and started traveling the world. Because of my father, she didn't like me. Uncle, I really love Daniel. Money isn't as important as him. I'm willing to spend on him." After pestering my uncle for a long time, he finally agreed. Seeing the transaction amount, my heart ached. "That's too much," I weakly said. My uncle, "Without 20 billion, Daniel's hole can't be filled." Me, 20 billion? How much do I have left? Maybe. Forget it. Uncle frowned at me. "Seems you don't love him that much after all?" Me, "Speaking of which, money is more practical." "Don't worry. That Daniel kid has the ability to solve this crisis. Your money won't be lost." I gritted my teeth and gave the money to Daniel. Soon, Daniel messaged, "Where did you get this?" Me, "My mother left it to me." Daniel, "All of it?" Feeling it was everything, I replied, "Yes." The dialogue box showed typing for a long time. Then he replied, "Silly wife." The next day, Daniel came with a pile of transfer agreements, including 76% of Daniel Group's equity transfer documents. My best friend Vicky and I were stunned. "All my assets are here. Once you sign, they'll all be yours," Daniel said expressionlessly. Vicky secretly communicated with me using lip language. I wasn't stupid. I understood the risks. "Daniel, these are fine under your name. "You're my wife, I want to give you everything," he said seriously. I couldn't refuse, so I signed. Vicky rolled her eyes endlessly, attacking me with lip language. "Idiot! With all Daniel's recent negative news, you dare sign? When you're drowning in debt, don't expect me to share a penny." Infuriating. Big idiot. After Daniel left, Vicky was about to scold me. I interrupted, "Don't worry, my real name is Emma, but I signed Emma Sue." Vicky paused, then burst out laughing. "Bastard! It's still you." At the Daniel family banquet before the wedding, Daniel formally introduced me to his family. "Emma is the purest, kindest girl." I blushed. "Kind for sure, pure? Maybe." The Daniel family accepted me and told me the truth. Daniel Group was doing well, with focus overseas. The Daniel family felt Daniel's photo proposal was inappropriate. They wanted to test me, since marriage is a lifetime commitment. Throughout the banquet, all I could think about was signing Emma Sue on the asset transfer documents. After marriage, Daniel and I were perfectly compatible in every way. He really had prosopagnosia, always confusing people, but could always recognize me. Just when I thought we'd live happily ever after, Yara returned. Ethan had abandoned her, returned to Hong Kong, and was about to marry someone else. Yara's first act upon returning was to beg me to return Daniel to her, even threatening suicide. Since childhood, Mrs. Chan and Yara had always treated me well. Everything at home revolved around me, never mistreating me. I was torn. At night, I tossed and turned in bed. The bedroom door opened softly. It was Daniel returning. He leaned down, gently kissing my forehead, then my nose, finally my lips. Thinking of leaving him, my eyes instantly welled up. I bit my lip, trying to hold back, but couldn't stop crying. Idiot, why cry? I came back early. A half-month trip, I finished in 10 days. His voice was low and gentle, with a hint of helpless laughter. He kissed away my tears. "Woo-woo. Don't cry, I'll make Emma happy," he said, a mischievous smile curling his lips. His warm hand reached into my pajamas, fingertips lightly brushing my waist. Just as I was about to succumb, I remembered the doctor's warning. Panicked, I pushed him away. "What's wrong?" Daniel stopped, staring at me. 7 times 8 is 56. 56 plus 9 is? I muttered, calculating the days. 65, he chuckled, teasing. "Not 65 times tonight, is it?" I shook my head, wrapping my arms around Daniel's neck. We pressed close together. "Daniel, I really like you. Super like. I super like my Emma too. I love her." Daniel's voice was low and passionate. His hot breath brushed my ear, making me shiver. He leaned back slightly, gaze locked on my eyes. His eyes were full of affection and longing. His long fingers gently caressed my cheek. The next second, his lips sealed mine. His tongue urgently pried open my teeth. My mind went blank, instinctively clutching his clothes. I was useless, unable to resist his slightest provocation. Reason tugged at my mind. Over 3 months, should be fine. Plus Daniel was especially gentle in this aspect. He knew how to coax and stop. Shouldn't hurt the baby. Besides, we didn't know about the pregnancy in the first 3 months. We did it plenty. Daniel's baby was stable. Soon, my reason dissipated in his intense love. I let myself sink into the love. My hands unconsciously climbed his back, responding to this intense love. Afterwards, I was too tired to lift my arms. Daniel carried me to bathe, changed my pajamas, then contentedly hugged me as we fell asleep. I was wide awake, my mind increasingly clear. The room was silent. Daniel's even breathing by my ear. His features looked deeper in the shadows. High nose bridge, slightly pursed thin lips. His usually sharp brows softened in sleep. Thinking I couldn't hold or kiss this handsome man again, I felt terrible. I couldn't help gently raising my hand. My fingertips carefully traced his brows. What should I do? Should I leave? Daniel wanted to marry Yara. I was just a substitute. Now that the real one's back, I should leave gracefully. If Daniel knew I'd replaced Yara to marry him, would he hate me? Yes, definitely. Daniel hated being deceived the most. These 3 years of happiness were stolen by me. It was time to end it. After thinking all night, I decided to follow Yara's plan. Pretend to travel, let Daniel not see me for a long time. Then Yara would pretend to be me and return. Yara and I were half-sisters. We both took after our father. We looked 60% alike. With Daniel's prosopagnosia, he definitely wouldn't notice. I took out my phone, ready to message Yara. But halfway through typing, I regretted it. After much deliberation I sent, "Sis, with money you can have any man. Is 6 billion enough? If not, I'll add more. I just want Daniel." Back then, my uncle gave Daniel's company 2 billion. Later Daniel returned 6 billion. After sending the message, I snuggled into Daniel's arms, hugging his waist tightly. Daniel murmured sleepily, "Wife, love you." I loved him more. I'd never leave my dear husband. In the morning, I was awakened by message alerts. Daniel was still sleeping soundly. It was a message from Yara. "Emma, I don't want money." I remember my childhood days with Daniel. I realized I love him. Back then I was confused by Ethan, thought I loved him. Now I'm clear, I love Daniel. Please, return Daniel to me, okay? I'll give you anything, I just want Daniel. Seeing the message, my world collapsed. If Yara didn't let go, Daniel would eventually discover I'd replaced her. I wouldn't be able to face Daniel then. I should leave, preserve some dignity. I gently took Daniel's hand, placed it on my still flat belly. Looking deeply at him, my heart felt squeezed. Breathing became difficult. "Baby, this is Daddy. We should go." I quietly got out of bed, packed what I needed to take, steeled my heart and left. Vicky had married my cousin. They went abroad for their honeymoon. My uncle and others also went traveling. They wouldn't return for a while. I could only temporarily follow Yara's arrangement. Go to Lawn City, over 2,000 kilometers from the capital. We agreed to meet at the airport. My father came too. He looked guilty. Shouldn't have let Emma replace Yara back then. Now Daniel's secretly investigating you sisters. Should be discovered soon. He's investigating secretly? My heart sank. Yara said so. My father looked at Yara. Yara paused, then explained. Yes, a few days ago someone came with my childhood photo. Asked me questions, I said nothing, avoided him. I suspect it was someone Daniel sent. I felt lucky I left quickly. Otherwise I wouldn't know how to face Daniel. After a brief chat, we parted. My father personally took me to Lawn City. Also brought Uncle Wu and Auntie Wang who'd cared for me since childhood. Uncle Wu was responsible for my travel safety. He was kind and upright, with excellent driving skills and martial arts. Auntie Wang handled my meals and daily life. Her cooking suited my taste perfectly. They'd watched me grow up, never married. Always treated me like their own daughter. After arriving, my company kept urging my father to return for work. He stayed with me for a week before going back to the capital. In Lawn City, during the day I laughed with Uncle Wu and Auntie Wang. At night, hiding under the covers thinking of Daniel, I cried. A month later, I got a call from my uncle. He was still abroad. Said Daniel called looking for me. Asked if I'd quarreled with Daniel and run away from home. Seemed Daniel had investigated, discovered I deceived him. Wanted to settle accounts with me. I told my uncle to ignore Daniel. If he called again, don't answer. Just enjoy traveling abroad. I'd handle my own matters. My uncle trusted my relationship with Daniel. Thought it was just a marital spat. A small matter. Didn't say more. I thought, if Daniel contacted my uncle, he'd soon contact Vicky. I quickly reached out to Vicky. Back when Vicky knew I'd replaced Yara to marry Daniel. She'd scolded me all night, even cursing in her sleep. This time she cursed even more viciously. Vicky, you useless thing, she tells you to step down and you do? Back then she refused to marry. Why should you yield now? Vicky, you treat her as a real sister, she treats you as a cousin. If she really cared for you, how could she ruin your happiness? Vicky, I treat you as my bestie, you treat me as nothing. Before your wedding, I advised till my tongue was tied. Vicky, idiot. Emma, you big idiot. Vicky's mouth didn't stop. To placate her anger, I quickly changed the subject. Me, little Vicky, some happy news. You always wanted to be a godmother, hee hee. Your wish came true. Baby's over 4 months. Surprised? Happy? There was sudden silence on the other end. A minute later came Vicky's roar, even angrier than before. Emma, you super invincible big idiot. Oxygen. I need oxygen. You're killing me. Me? Huh? Vicky. It's Daniel's, right? What a stupid question. Of course it's that blind guy's. I quietly said, Daniel's not blind, he just has prosopagnosia. Vicky. What's the difference? Can't even recognize his own wife. Emma. Does Daniel have something on you? Or did he see you kill someone? Why so in love? What's so great about him? Me. You don't understand. Daniel's really super great. Vicky. Shut up. Tell me, what about the child? I instantly replied, mine and Daniel's baby will definitely be born. Vicky. Being a single mom is great? What if the child wants a dad later? Do you know what this child will face in the future? Me. I have money. Another silence on the other end. Vicky. Emma, your life is your decision, no regrets in this world. So many good men out there. Won't you consider others? Me. No regrets, I really love Daniel. I deceived him, he did nothing wrong. As I spoke, thinking of Daniel, I cried again. Hearing me cry, Vicky sounded even more annoyed. Cry your ass. Can pregnant women cry? Anyway, do what you want, nothing to do with me. Vicky hung up directly. I stood frozen, my mood at rock bottom. A few minutes later, 3 messages from Vicky popped up. Idiot, due date's October, right? I'll be first to hold the baby. Baby's clothes are on me, toys too. My Emma, don't cry, I'm still here, I'll never abandon you. I cried even harder. Why keep this child? Another reason. Daniel and I wanted a child right after marriage, but couldn't conceive for a long time. I secretly went to the hospital for a checkup. The doctor said I was weak, severe uterine coldness. Might have difficulty conceiving. I really liked children. Finally pregnant, how could I bear to give it up? My father snuck to Lawn City whenever he could. My slightly bulging belly couldn't be hidden long. Soon he discovered I was pregnant. He seemed drained of strength. Staggered to the sofa, slowly sat down. Head lowered, hands limply at his sides. After a long silence, he finally looked up. His eyes filled with guilt and pain. Voice hoarse, speaking with deep helplessness. I failed your mother, didn't take good care of you. I deserve to die. My eyes welled up. Dad, I chose this myself. My path, no one else to blame. He seemed not to hear me. Just kept shaking his head. His eyes redder, seemingly filled with tears. Face full of remorse. I'm not a qualified father. All this is my fault. Should have stopped you from marrying Daniel. But now it's too late. Dad, I'm fine now. Think positively. You'll soon have a grandchild. Didn't you always envy Uncle Lee's cute granddaughter? I comforted him. My father said nothing more. Slowly got up, dragging heavy steps. Mechanically walked to the window. Sunlight streamed in but couldn't dispel his gloom. This time, my father stayed to care for me for half a month. Then returned to the capital. The day after my father left, Yara and Mrs. Chen came to Lawn City. As soon as they entered, they started persuading me to abort. Mrs. Chen, Emma, if Daniel knows you're carrying his child, he won't let you off. You should know, the Daniel family doesn't allow illegitimate children. Yara, sister, this child definitely can't stay. I've contacted a local professional hospital. Can operate immediately. The longer the pregnancy, the more you'll suffer. I shook my head, refusing. He won't know. The child is mine, I'll give birth. Yara and Mrs. Chen kept persuading. Auntie Wong couldn't help but interject. Madam, Miss Yara, Emma will decide her own matters. The child's over 5 months now. Aborting at this stage has high risks and harm. Mrs. Chen's usually loving face instantly darkened. Eyes wide, glaring fiercely at Auntie Wong. Like an enraged beast, sharply yelling. "Who are you, a servant, to interrupt?" Before finishing, she suddenly raised her hand. Slapped towards Auntie Wong, as if wanting to knock her down. She missed. Uncle Wu quickly stepped in. Shielded Auntie Wong behind him. For the first time, I saw ferocity on Mrs. Chen's always gentle face. "You're rebelling?" Mrs. Chen screamed, chest heaving. Seemed thoroughly enraged. Not giving up, she slapped at Auntie Wong again. More frenzied than before. Uncle Wu frowned, eyes flashing with ruthlessness. He reached out, accurately grabbed Mrs. Chen's wrist. Forcefully flung her far away. Mrs. Chen stumbled, nearly falling. "You dare push my mom?" Yara also jumped out. Uncle Wu didn't even glance at her. Hands seemingly with infinite strength. Grabbed one in each hand, like lifting chickens. Threw Yara and Mrs. Chen out the door. Action decisive and clean. He coldly said, voice icy. Mr. Su said, "Anyone disturbing Miss Emma's rest must leave." After speaking, bang! Coldly and resolutely closed the door. One word. Handsome. I started feeling disgusted with this mother-daughter pair. Outside came Yara's voice. "Emma, Daniel and I are very loving now. You giving birth to your brother-in-law's child, don't you feel ashamed? I advise you to abort, lest people gossip later. The child won't be able to hold their head up when grown." These words thoroughly enraged me. Furious, I opened the door. Ashamed? What about you? Pursuing true love, having your own sister replace you in marriage. After being dumped, returning to make your sister leave. Are you ashamed? Yara avoided my gaze, not daring to look at me. Mrs. Chen quickly mediated. "Emma, don't be angry. Your sister just pities you, can't bear you being a single mom." Spoke harshly in confusion. Seems not thrown far enough. Uncle Wu again grabbed one in each hand. Took them out of my sight. "Emma, ignore them, let's have soup." Auntie Wong pulled me inside. I trembled with anger. Couldn't believe Yara would say such vicious words. Had she changed, or was she always pretending? After that, Yara and Mrs. Chen didn't appear again. Only my father shuttled between places. 4 months later, I gave birth to a son, named Qian Su. Vicky was the first to hold Qian Su. She hugged me, crying loudly. Praised me for being amazing, giving birth to a person. She also told me, Daniel's prosopagnosia is really severe. Some time ago, he heard I'd returned. Mistook my sister for me. Asked my sister where Emma was. My sister of course didn't know. Then he found me, asked where Emma was. I said I was my sister, he actually believed it. My sister and I look nothing alike. Really laughable. I was amused by her, the pain lessened. Daniel's prosopagnosia was indeed severe. But he really held a grudge, still chasing after me. My uncle and others were still abroad. I hadn't told them about Daniel and me. If they knew, it'd be another trouble. Over a year passed peacefully. Grandma's 80th birthday. My father insisted I attend. He confirmed Daniel was abroad on business. Definitely wouldn't run into him. Grandma also called, said I must come. Otherwise she wouldn't hold the birthday banquet. I reluctantly agreed. The night before the banquet, I brought my son back to the capital. Next day, early to the Su family old residence. Grandma held an overjoyed. I went to my old room on the second floor to get my childhood toys. Coincidentally overheard Yara and Mrs. Chen whispering. Mrs. Chen, how's it going lately? Has Daniel touched you? Yara, I've been making myself as seductive as possible. But he still can't, I can't even get close. He says whenever I approach, he feels inferior about his inability. Daniel can't? Impossible. He's terrifyingly strong. Mrs. Chen, maybe have him see a doctor? Back when he crashed his motorcycle and injured down there. Did the doctor say it was permanent or temporary? Yara, he only told me he injured down there in a motorcycle crash. Can't perform. Didn't say if permanent or temporary. What? Daniel can't? Qu'est-ce que? He's always been strong in this aspect. The blow must have been huge. Mrs. Chen, hurry and find a way. With a child your position will be secure. That little bitch drank so much cold-natured Chinese medicine, still got pregnant. Thinking about it makes me angry. Little bitch? Cold-natured Chinese medicine? I suddenly realized, no wonder it took me so long to conceive. The medicine Mrs. Chen sent wasn't fertility-enhancing Chinese medicine at all. Yara, Mom, don't worry, that little bitch is stupid. I told her to leave, she left, very obedient. We've been coaxing her all these years. I'm exhausted acting. Once I secure my position as Mrs. Daniel, we can stop acting. So all these years they've been acting. Only today did I truly recognize them. Really stupid enough. Mrs. Chen, good daughter, Mom believes in you. We'll eventually endure through all these years pretending to be a loving mother in front of that little bitch. I've had enough too. But we still shouldn't break with her. She still has value to exploit. That old bitch, her mother, left her 200 billion. Coaxing her has no downside. I could tolerate them talking about me, but talking about my mom, couldn't tolerate at all. I forcefully pushed open the door, charged in, ruthlessly slapped Mrs. Chen 10 times in a row. Emma, you're crazy. Dare hit my mom. Yara grabbed me. Almost forgot you. I turned, grabbed Yara, slapped her face repeatedly. The mother-daughter pair pulled at me together. I was alone, soon at a disadvantage. Let go of my daughter. My father's voice came. He forcefully pushed Yara and Mrs. Chen away, shielded me behind him. Mr. Su, your daughter hit me first. Mrs. Chen covered her face, crying. I told my father everything I'd overheard. Mrs. Chen, you're ruthless. All these years pretending, I thought you truly treated Emma as your own daughter. That's why I kept you in this family. Never expected you've been pretending all these years. My father was also furious. Fine, fine. Since we've broken pretense, let's break it more. Mr. Su, you old impotent thing, still won't give me status. In this family I'm just a maid. All these years you've remained chaste for that old bitch. You think she'll look back at you? No. She's abandoned you. Mrs. Chen coldly snorted. Face. Next second, my father slapped Mrs. Chen's face. You're the old bitch, not worthy to mention my Yunwan. Yunwan was my mother. Back then you said you'd stay to care for Emma and Yara. I didn't want to keep you. Get out. Now get out. My father continued. Fine, I'll leave. Mrs. Chen pushed my father, rushed downstairs. Yara followed downstairs. My father told me. Yara was conceived when he got drunk and had a one-night stand with Mrs. Chen. Back then he hadn't yet married my mother in a business alliance. When I was 6, Mrs. Chen brought Yara to our door. My mother, always proud, couldn't accept this. Divorced my father. Back then my grandfather was still alive. The Su family was under his control. He believed Yara was still Su family blood. Acknowledged her. After my parents divorced, Mrs. Chen stayed in the Su family under the pretext of caring for Yara. She also constantly fawned over me. Was very patient with me. I was young then, didn't understand. Thought she truly cared for me. I begged my father to let her stay with me. That's why my father agreed. All these years, my father still couldn't forget my mother. I used to think my father fell for Mrs. Chen. That's why my mother divorced him. Downstairs. Continuous laughter. My father and I went downstairs. They were playing with Anan. Anan's milky voice. Gidge. Jia jia. A man was holding Anan back to us. His figure stood out in the crowd. A well-tailored suit perfectly fitting his form. Narrow waist. Long legs. The straight trouser lines made his figure appear even taller. Since when did our family have such eye-catching relatives? But the more I looked, the more familiar this back seemed. Could it be my baby's father? Mama. Anan first noticed me. Seeing me, his hands kept waving. The man turned, looked at me. Heavens! It really was Daniel. I lowered my head, avoiding his gaze. Also noticed Yara and Mrs. Chen hadn't left. Both were on the first floor. Others were still playing with Anan. Little Anan. What do you call me? Papa. Anan obediently let Daniel hold him, wrapping his arms around Daniel's neck without any hesitation. How could he feel shy when he was looking at an older version of himself? Anan was practically a miniature version of Daniel. Little Anan, what do you call me? Daniel asked. Anan looked at me for guidance. I nervously instructed my son to call him Uncle. Daniel's face turned cold, his voice indifferent. Miss Emma, do you call your father Uncle? I was speechless. The room fell into silence. Daniel gently placed Anan in Grandma's arms. Then he suddenly grabbed me, a polite smile on his face as he nodded to the crowd. Excuse me, I need to handle some family matters. He carried me upstairs over his shoulder. My father followed. Daniel, let's talk this through calmly. Daniel stopped and set me down, looking at my father with respect. Dad, I don't blame Emma for leaving me. I just want to have a proper talk with her. My father paused, then seemed to understand, smiling as he went back downstairs. What did he mean by not blaming me for leaving him? Daniel led me into my room, familiar with the way. As soon as we entered, he pushed me onto the couch, pinning my hands above my head, his eyes red and voice hoarse. Emma, are you bullying me? No, I don't know what to say. What did I do wrong? You left without a word, and I went crazy looking for you. Everyone bullied me. No one would tell me where you were. His other hand gripped my waist tightly, his hot tears falling onto my cheek. Daniel was crying, looking completely broken. Why were you looking for me? I blurted out, my mind blank. Daniel frowned. My wife ran away. What do you think I was looking for you for? Didn't you investigate everything? Investigate what? Didn't you find out I replaced Yara to marry you? What nonsense. Replacing Yara? The only one I wanted to marry was Emma. Daniel's tone was firm. I was stunned, but you came with Yara's childhood photo to propose. That photo was of you as a child. The name on the marriage certificate was Emma. Wait, let me process this. I gave you the family crest when we were kids. I wanted to marry you, Emma. I've had prosopagnosia since childhood, and I was afraid I'd forget your face. Before I went abroad, I went to your house to find you, but you weren't home. I asked your stepmother for a childhood photo of you, and she gave me one. The truth was clear. Mrs. Chen knew Daniel had prosopagnosia and gave him Yara's photo, meaning she and Yara always knew Daniel intended to marry me. Daniel said my father's counter-surveillance skills were so strong it was a pity he didn't become a special forces soldier. Every time Daniel sent someone to follow my father, he'd lead them in circles around the busiest subway stations and successfully lose them. In the end, Daniel had no choice but to play along, treating Yara as me to make them lower their guard and find an opportunity to learn my whereabouts. Daniel also told me his mind had always been on his career, but when he reached marriageable age and his family pressured him, he thought only of me. He remembered my name and came with the photo to propose. On the day of the engagement, he met Yara and felt something was off. On the day of the wedding photos, he saw my signature fake smile and recognized me. I asked, "What's a signature fake smile?" Daniel pulled me into his arms. "You've been fake smiling like that since you were a kid. When you're not smiling, you're aloof, but when you fake smile, you look silly. You're the silly one." I pinched his arm hard. He laughed, pressing me down and kissing me fiercely. "Emma, I have prosopagnosia, but I'm not blind. Besides, the obvious A and D. I'm an E. E my foot. If you're an E, then I'm 30. 30? You're not 30. How do you know? Seems like you've been sneaking peeks. Who cares to look?" We bickered like this. That night, we returned to our home with Anan, Uncle Wu, and Auntie Wang. Nothing in the house had changed. It was exactly as I left it. I was curious how Daniel couldn't recognize anyone but could recognize me. "My phone is full of your photos. I look at them whenever I have time. Your face is etched in my mind." As he spoke, he carried me out of the bathroom and tossed me onto the bed. Suddenly, I remembered something. "Did you injure yourself down there in a motorcycle accident?" "Ha! How did you know?" Daniel looked at me with a teasing expression. How should I comfort him? He seemed to have accepted it already. "It's okay, I still love you the same." I hugged him. Daniel flipped over, pinning me down. "I'm perfectly fine. I just lied to her." Lied to her. She was after me, but I couldn't let her have me. I'm a man of virtue. I had to sacrifice my reputation to protect my purity. Now tell me, don't I love you? Daniel gently bit my collarbone. Then I'll reward you with a kiss. I wrapped my arms around his neck. Kiss me here. Daniel grinned mischievously. Just as we were about to start our little game, the door was banged loudly. Mommy. Want mommy? It was Anan knocking on the door. Baby, go back to your room. Mommy will be there in 5 minutes. I called out to Anan. I'm not that fast. Daniel muttered under his breath. Mommy want mommy. Anan kept knocking, and Auntie Wong couldn't stop him. I pushed Daniel away and got out of bed. Wife, you can't favor the child over your husband. Daniel hugged me. Let's put our son to sleep first. Be good. I straightened my pajamas and left the room. Daniel followed me to put Anan to sleep. Anan's favorite bedtime story was The CEO's Fierce Love, Daniel's Obsession. By the 6th chapter, Anan was sound asleep. Mommy, it's my turn to be put to sleep. Daniel scooped me up and whispered in my ear. This was too much. Yara left the Sue family and chose to start anew with her mother. Not long after, news came that she had hooked up with Ethan and was caught by Ethan's wife. Both she and her mother ended up in a miserable state. Auntie Wong and Uncle Wu started a sweet romance. My father still held a torch for my mother. Every time he messaged her, she read but never replied. My mother continued her world travels, while my father remained in his unrequited love. Vicky and my cousin had a beautiful baby girl. Daniel and I were green with envy. The following year, Daniel and I got our wish and welcomed a pink, adorable baby girl. The future looked bright.